I know so many of you is so nice as well. For those who don't know me, I'm Nat Miller, the Director of Conservation for Audubon Great Lakes. I've been with Audubon for about 6.5 years now. And I am coming to you from, you'll probably never guess who's closest to me right now. It's actually Kim N. I'm just down the street from you. I'm at Hampton Inn in Maryville, Indiana, visiting with some partners on the Little Cow River project that Dunes Calumet Audubon's involved in too. And it's nice to get some spring snow this morning in Northwest Indiana. The birds are coming back and the snow is not stopping them. So I want this to be very informal. Please do use the chat or raise your hand if you have questions. But I'll also save some questions for the end as well. And, you know, I think many of you who are on this call have been instrumental in crafting this vision. And that's what's really so exciting to me is this is a participatory grassroots bottom-up plan that really envisions utilizing the muscle of Audubon. And the muscle of Audubon are the dedicated folks like you, our chapter leaders and our members across the region. So we see this vision plan as a blueprint, how to best conserve the most indispensable coastal areas of the Great Lakes. Our Great Lakes vision plan is very much focused on the watershed and the nearshore coastal areas of what we see as the most important ecological resource in the Midwest, perhaps the most important freshwater resource in the world, some could argue, with the Great Lakes that provide drinking water to over 40 million people and support the life cycles of over 350 bird species. So we have a bold action that we to save, to restore and conserve this region and for the benefit of birds and people. And we launched that about 2 weeks ago. And thanks to our really incredible communication team now, we were overwhelmed by the response. Nicole, I think we're at like now over 100,000 hits on this and had in the 25s or so media sources and articles and still doing interviews, which is awesome. People are very interested. So if you go to the next slide, this is our vision for the Great Lakes. And really, I see this as a blueprint for conservation of nearshore areas that has the goal of saving birds and improving our water quality and the resilience of our wetland system that surrounds the Great Lakes. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see our headline goals are to really stabilize declining bird populations, especially water birds, and within water birds, especially breeding marsh birds that we know have done very poorly over the last few decades. And while we do that, we'll have a win-win that improves water quality for the Great Lakes and especially for communities that have suffered from water quality issues. And we'll protect and restore through our influence at least 300,000 acres that we've mapped out. If you go to the next slide, I think it's safe to say, it's not hyperbole to say that we're in a bird emergency now. Some of the recent science that has come out, especially what I call the 3 billion birds report, is really shocking and a call to action. The fact that within less than a lifetime of a person, we've lost 25% of our bird population in North America. 1 in 4 birds are gone since the 1970s is really something that can hit you with the numbers, right? It's like understanding that 4 birds in a tree 50 years ago, and now there's 3 birds in the tree. If you go to the next slide, we know based on data that some species have been more impacted than others. Some have done all right in the last 50 years, actually, like waterfowl and raptors, which have recovered thanks to conservation efforts. Grassland birds have faced the worst, though, over 50% decline. Eastern meadowlark is a good one to call out because a lot of folks I talk to who think about the old days remember seeing meadowlarks on every fence post and in agricultural areas even, and now 3 and 4 meadowlarks are gone since the 1970s. If you go to the next slide, in the Midwest, of course, we have incredible importance for migratory stopover, especially for birds that breed to the north. And 2 in 5 Baltimore Orioles, for example, and almost 30% overall of migratory songbirds have been lost since that time. And finally, the one I like to call out, because we often skip over them, is aerial insectivores, which have lost almost a third of their populations, and even common birds like barn swallows are at 40% declines in a short 50 years. So that's our call to action. We got to do something to turn this around. Audubon science shows that 2/3 of North American birds are under future threat because of climate change. We're already seeing shifting ranges and shifting migration patterns, seeing birds pushed to the north. But our study, our recent climate study from our national science team also shows that if we can keep global warming to within 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is most likely the best case scenario now, we can improve conditions for the majority of those threatened birds, and they may be able to adapt and handle climate change. So still time to focus on not just adaptation, but also mitigation under climate change. So that's bad news. You guys have all heard that. Well, here's a little more point on the bad news of 2 species that we call out in the Midwest that really point to not only dramatic shifts in range loss, but also the opportunity to prevent range loss in the bobolink and the common loon there. You can see this is projected with 3 degrees Celsius warming. All of the red would be current range, breeding range, summer breeding range, which would be lost. So I think both these species would be projected to be out of climatic suitability in the United States and then be pushed into adapting to other breeding areas or making do in a very different climate here in the Midwest. We know those threats are connected to the Great Lakes, the climate threats, but as well as urban development, agricultural development, urban issues like wastewater. A lot of people who are not from the immediate Great Lakes vicinity are always surprised to hear that we still have days of heavy rain where we have to open up our sewers directly into our drinking source, into our rivers and into our lakes. There are many threats because of the focus of the coastal areas for development on these coastal areas themselves. Go to the next slide. Some of my new favorite birds. I was looking for these today, Kim, at Martin Luther King Drive. But it's been a little cold for them. These are birds that we've paid special attention to in the Great Lakes because of their unique connection to healthy and functioning wetland system. They are what we call indicator species of quality wetlands. So can we listen to maybe the pied-billed grebe if we get the whooping call? This would have been nice to hear this morning, but not yet. Really unique species, and they're all, we lump them into secretive marsh birds, but they all have unique aspects even within that category, right? The pied-billed grebe is somewhat duck-like in the way it dives deep for its food sources. The coot, have you ever seen feet on a bird like the coot's feet there? And I'm telling you, that's not just magnified from the water. That's really what the feet look like even outside of the water. Virginia rail and other rails kind of remind me of chickens, but they're in wet meadows and marsh conditions. And of course, the common gallinule, formerly the moorhen, is a beautifully unique species that depends on high quality marsh that's not an open water pond or rampant with invasive monoculture vegetation. Which other one should we listen to? Who's controlling this? Isabella or Nicole? I'll bet Nicole picked Virginia. The grunt, the pig, when I'm talking to volunteers, marshbird monitoring volunteers, I say, listen for the pig. That's the Virginia rail. All right, let's go to the next slide. Marsh birds are particularly impacted by loss of coastal wetlands, right? Historically, we've lost 50% of coastal wetlands in the Great Lakes. Those that remain, about half, 80% of what remain are degraded. And now in the last 30 years, really since the Clean Water Act, where we have no net loss of wetlands, although that could be argued, and it is being argued in House and state legislations like in Indiana. But really, it's the degradation of wetland now that's driving declines, and black terns may be the best example of a dramatic decline, 80% decline in the last, even I think just 40 years, 80% decline, up to 80%, especially in Michigan. If you go to the next slide. So our plan is to, we know from good science that these birds are dependent on quality breeding habitats, marsh birds. And when we restore quality breeding habitats, these birds come by and occupy territories, breed and nest and have young. So that's really got to be the focus of a conservation strategy, is to protect and restore Great Lakes coastal wetlands. Go to the next slide. Here's what I already talked about. Under significant threat because of loss of breeding habitat. You can go to the next slide. Those same issues of loss of habitat and the solution, the creation of wetland habitat in coastal areas, creates an incredible opportunity to have a win-win for a massive conservation success in this Great Lakes coastal system. So we know without wetlands and with increased storms and rapid fluctuations of lake levels and uncertain fluctuations of lake levels with climate change, we know coastal communities are under threat as well. So we use these birds as a mechanism to document condition and inspire improved condition and leverage best management practices for restoring coastal wetlands. When we have birds occupying and nesting in these territories, we know that the wetlands providing adequate habitat. Our national science team, in partnership with some of the science folks in the Great Lakes region, have been working on iterations of a Great Lakes marsh bird spatial prioritization for many years. Several of you have probably seen earlier editions of this. Thanks to really great data sets from the EPA and the Coastal Wetland Monitoring Program, of which some folks have been involved, some of our chapters and members have been involved in collecting this data. We had a robust set of data to allow for modeling. So we modeled the presence of 16 focal marsh bird species across the Great Lakes within 15 kilometers of the shoreline to really determine where and what variables are contributing to the most important locations for these birds. That's in darker red is the suitability for breeding marsh birds. Though that then informed our conservation strategy. So you'll notice that our 12 circles there, our 12 priority regions, are not in every dark red area, but we made decisions that also include the proximity to our members and the opportunity to protect and restore wetlands, as well as the opportunity to improve nutrient and sediment loading. Where do we have big nutrient and sediment problems where if we restore wetlands, we can have win-wins. So those 12 priority regions are areas that are very important to marsh birds, but there is a difference there that you'll notice. If you can go to the next slide. So we've worked with a series of partners and funders over the last several years to identify the potential to restore and improve coastal wetlands, and really across the 8 states, so the 5 states that Audubon Great Lakes works in, but also Minnesota, Pennsylvania, and New York. We've identified a suite of pipeline projects, I like to say. We got projects ready to go. And if we could implement those, we could really get to impacting the majority of priority coastal wetlands that remain. So that's our goal. And in the back of our new strategy, we have all of those projects detailed. And of course, some of them have already been implemented, but most of them are still in the concept phase or working through partners and funding opportunities. These are the birds that we all care about so much. I see we have those. Can anybody find the error in this? It's a pretty obvious one when you see
That's
it.
not a Sora.
That's not a Sora. That's the best perching ability I've ever seen from a Sora. But these are the birds that we're looking to improve, and we're setting goals with partners like the EPA and other federal agencies and state on how can we get these bird populations back up to, or at least stabilize from their declines. Here's another way. Here's a kind of a different way of looking at the spatial prioritization that really shows you kind of across the entire region the most important areas. What really jumped out to us on the map here is, of course, the UP of Michigan, the southern coast of the UP in particular, into the Straits of Mackinac and into Canada, the St. Mary's River area. But also you see St. Louis River estuary and kind of far west Lake Superior. That's Chequamegon Bay. That's really bright yellow. Green Bay and North Green Bay into the UP of Michigan. Saginaw Bay, the Calumet region. St. Clair Flats in Michigan jumps off the map. Western Lake Erie, of course. Rochester and Eastern Lake Ontario as a whole really jump off the map at us. Some folks who've been working in Calumet may recognize this. This is what I've been so excited about over the last couple of weeks. We've launched our data hub. Maybe we could share a link to that in the chat. This is something we hope to replicate across all of our priority regions. And it's really a data visualization tool to show marsh bird occupancy at different sites and that change over time. So what you're looking at here is all of our monitoring sites in the Calumet region and all species over the, looks like over 4 years. And if you just go back to that real quick, one thing that we're very excited about is not just this data, but the Calumet is where we're most active in our restoration with on the ground and with our partners. And you can see there the early signs of trends, right? 2020 is in kind of that peach color. And for most species, 2019 and 2020 were better than the previous years. And that's for species that are on a trajectory that's heading down. In Calumet, we've had 3 species locally extirpated, and most of our marsh bird species are well below. But this is a really incredible tool. I encourage you to check it out, learn more about the species on this site as well, but especially how they're doing in different sites in Indiana and Illinois. The work on the ground is, I like to say, it's not rocket science. We know we gotta fix, a lot of times we gotta fix hydrology or create a system that can replicate a more natural system of ebbs and flows of water. We gotta get rid of invasive plants and other pollution, and we've got to get native plants installed. In urban areas, a lot of times this means doing water level management in places that have been artificially drained or artificially stagnated by dams or railroads or roads, so that we can get back to a more rich mosaic wetland system. Here's our 12 priority regions. I kind of talked about a few of those on the map already. It's very nice to hear in the introductions that we got folks from several of these on the call. In Michigan, again, the Upper Peninsula and the Straits of Mackinac area, really, really critical for marsh birds. A lot of opportunity there for protection and management, as there's areas that are not as highly degraded. So they're, less of a restoration strategy, more of monitoring, understanding the system, finding opportunities for land protection. We're working closely with several partners, including the Sioux Tribe and the Michigan Department of Natural Resources and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to monitor black terns and other marsh birds up there, trying to protect those areas. Saginaw Bay, a fringing bay of incredible interspersed wetlands. We have an active project there as well at Wigwam Bay in the north. One of the remaining black tern strongholds in the Midwest is at Wigwam Bay. And we've just completed our first phase of a restoration project there. We also have work on the western side of Michigan, in the river mouths of Michigan into Lake Michigan are really critical. Places like the Grand River, the Muskegon River are areas that we're now finding partners and finding projects on the ground. And I think that, oh yes, and so the bottom one there's actually 4 in Michigan. So that's the bottom is St. Clair Flats, Lake St. Clair, and into the Detroit River. St. Clair Flats is another area we've been working with Detroit Audubon for quite some time on black terns. the Calumet region. This is where I am today. This is where Kim has done so much of her great work. 15,000 acres we've identified across Calumet. Almost all of these are fairly altered, fragmented wetlands, really incredibly rich history of supporting tremendous marsh birds and waterfowl and migratory land birds as well. Here we've already impacted about 4,000 acres, improving management at those and restoring. We're reconnecting lakes to Lake Michigan, restoring river areas and backwater wetland areas, working with about 20 different landowners to really prioritize marsh birds in the restoration. So not just doing the work ourselves, but really getting partners to dig in as well. Ohio, my new home is in Ohio, despite me being in Hammond today. And we're very excited for the opportunity to move forward projects under H2 Ohio and Ohio's new commitment to clean water, not just for Lake Erie, but also for the Ohio River and Mississippi River watershed. But incredible opportunity and already projects in the pipeline in Western Lake Erie Basin, in Sandusky Bay, especially opportunity to create incredible stopover habitat as well, not just breeding marsh birds, but you have over 60,000 acres in Western Lake Erie has been identified of our top priority, which means it's in the top 20% of our spatial prioritization models. I know Bill Heck is excited to dig in to some of these wetlands. In Wisconsin, Green Bay has a suite of partners already doing great work. It's an area of concern with the EPA, so funding has been flowing there. It's obviously been tremendous work on restoring piping plover habitat with the creation of Cat Island. The output of the Fox River is a great example of a win-win situation with that barrier island where we can trap sediment and nutrients, create wetlands there that then create a cycle of improving water quality that comes out of the Fox River and into Green Bay, while creating really optimal habitat for breeding marsh birds. And on the other end of Wisconsin, on Lake Superior, just today I was working on project planning for our first project in the St. Louis River estuary. And it's at Alois Bay, called Wisconsin Point, one of the most incredible migratory stopover places in the world. If you're ever looking for a place to go, Duluth and Superior, Wisconsin, fantastic. There's a tremendous amount of wetlands in that estuary, and we're working with partners there to set up a landscape level approach for restoring those wetlands. Yeah, so the folks at Thorn Creek and maybe Dunes Cal will be the closest to these. Our best example, and now we have several, so we can already show how this work is effective. But at Big Marsh, a site in Chicago city limits, Chicago Park District, massive restoration there where over 100 acres of invasive species were removed. Water control system set up for a few hundred acres. And we're seeing this, which is the sign of success, breeding success. If you have chicks, I remember one day I was monitoring at a site actually just next to Big Marsh and saw a Sora pop out of the cattail. And then I saw right behind it, 4 or 5 little black chicks. And I said, oh yes, breeding success, it's working. The marsh birds are reproducing. So if you see a juvenile common gown, you know, or at least the turn should be an N at the end of that, then you know you're having success. Maybe you want to play a least bittern call for us. Maybe it's the CAC probably. Oh, folks ever heard that early in the morning at the marsh? And I think the next slide may show some of the data from Big Marsh. Oh, no. So I think, again, for Audubon, right, we're so uniquely positioned with all of you with us that there's an opportunity to really save the Great Lakes. And that's going to be an incredible legacy that we can leave behind for our children and our children's children. And it's possible. There's a lot of work, and a lot of people have told me this plan, you're going to impact 300,000 acres. You're never going to be able to do that. Well, look what we've done with piping plover, right? If there's resources and attention and partnership, of course, the Great Lakes population of piping plover is federally listed, so it's got good support. But that subspecies was on the brink, right? It was down to just a handful of pairs in the 80s, from 800 pairs in known historical nesting sites. And now we're getting them back, and they're on recovery. They're coming back to new places. We got them in Chicago for the first time in 50 years. It just shows you, if you can give birds a chance, then they can make do. All of you are already doing so much of this. I was joking with somebody, Don, the other day, that is there anything Don Burlett's not doing for Audubon? That guy is just amazing. I'm so glad to see him here today. But so many of you other folks on here, I know you're advocating for birds all the time. So keep it up and inspire others to do the same. Support your local natural areas and participate in community science, or planning other opportunities that these natural habitats that we know are so important can sustain their benefit for birds. There's so much opportunity now for in the new administration, and there's going to continue to be more in the 30 by 30 push, 30% of land protected in the US by 2030. Recovering America's Wildlife Act is an incredible opportunity to get funding into state governments that can start taking action for species that are not on the game list. So you folks already know all this, but stay inspired, connect with us. Our policy team is growing. Our network team is awesome with Troy and Isabella. We've never had this level of support from National Audubon to our amazing chapters in the Midwest before. So now's the time to get excited with us, and we're really eager to do that with all of you. Great Lakes is a national treasure. I love that, for birds and people. There's incredible opportunity for a future conservation success story here because of the declining populations of marsh birds. We know what we need to do. The science tells us we don't have that. We're 2 steps ahead here, right? Because we know we got to invest in this habitat that they find critical, and the science can guide that restoration. 42 projects already ready to go. We're hoping to keep moving those forward and get our partners to move them forward. Next week, we're presenting to all Great Lakes Restoration Initiative federal agencies about this plan. Many of them have seen it already, but we don't have to do this work ourselves, right? We can convince our friends in the agencies to help us. We're already seeing signs of recovery as well. Our website is improving day by day because of Nicole and her team. There's a lot going on that many of you are already participating in, but if you stay on our website and visit it, you'll see a lot of the new happenings there. And of course, follow us on social media as well. And I think that might be it. Yeah, I'll leave you with a beautiful sandhill crane, and where birds thrive, people prosper. We know that, right? Anybody see that recent science article that showed that people who watch birds are happier? And I saw this commentary online and said, well, we already know that. The science doesn't need to tell us that, but it's very true. Thanks. I'll be happy to take any questions or comments, thoughts, ideas.
Thank you so much, Matt. Go ahead.
So a question on the Calumet area, which, by the way, Big Marsh and Indian Ridge, just amazing what you've done there. So do you have any plans this year for any work at Big Marsh and Indian Ridge? And what do you think is going to happen at Dead Stick Pond this year?
It's almost like I planted that question, Diana. So great. Yeah, there's a lot of work still happening at Big Marsh and Indian Ridge Marsh. We'll have our seasonal crews out, young interns who are helping. The Chicago Park District owns both of those sites. And part of what we do is help the Park District kind of operationalize the management of marshes. They're really building their capacity, and how do we manage things that, we can't walk in. we might need a boat, or or have to do a drawdown in order to a water drawdown. So there will be continued invasive species control and native plantings at Big Marsh and Indian Ridge Marsh, but like you said, a lot of the bigger restoration is kind of over the hurdle already. So it's now kind of fine tuning and keeping on that management. One of the things that those of you who know marshes know, you're kind of managing for the conditions that can create habitat for birds. There's a natural dynamic flux of wetlands that get overvegetated just naturally, even from native species. And then muskrats come in and chew them up, beavers create dams, or water naturally gets deeper, and those areas open up a little bit. So that will change at Indian Ridge Marsh and Big Marsh. We'll see fluctuations year to year. Dead Stick Pond, we've just secured funding to turn that into a Chicago Park District site. They're currently negotiating a lease with the landowner, who is Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, MWRD. We're gonna help restore it over the next 2 years, put in a water control structure, and remove the invasive species, and probably get some community events happening out there maybe next year, probably not this year. But it'll be a park district park within 2 years. And amazing spot for shorebirds too. That's the other thing, is where you have water control system and you can have occasional drawdowns. You can also do this dynamic conservation. So in spring and fall, you can have more times of low water period to really support migrating shorebirds. And then in the summer breeding time for marsh birds, you can put water a little deeper to support those birds.
That's great.
We got to get you out there, Diane, together.
Thank you, Nat. Any other questions for Nat? And as a friendly reminder, we shared with you a really great social media toolkit that Nicole had put together. There are newsletter and social media post templates for you to use, as well as remember to invite us to your membership meetings. And we also would like to visit and present a similar version of Nat's presentation today at the council meetings, and again, your membership meetings. So this is definitely not the last conversation about the Great Lakes vision, and we would love to continue more conversations with all of you. Any additional questions?
Kim,
I
did you
had
have
a question for
Go ahead.
Annette. What kind of connections have you made with, like, specifically the Indiana Dunes National Park or the Indiana Dunes State Park? And are there similar kinds of connections with Department of Interior locations around the Great Lakes?
Yeah, at Indiana Dunes, we are monitoring marsh birds, and I think you know this. I think you might be one of the monitors, right, in Coles Bog and Great Marsh, and have presented results of that work to kind of inform their management and ongoing restoration at coastal areas. The national park especially really has a tremendous opportunity, and have been very open and accommodating to us to kind of provide a regional leadership role, and even Kim, conversations like utilizing their marsh master for marsh management beyond the borders of the park. So like thinking about the Little Cow, for example. I think some of those agencies that are already underway with restoration, it's more about supporting with data and advice and feedback mechanisms that can help fine tune management for bitterns versus rails, and how they think about their goal setting process. The Department of Interior Fish and Wildlife Service is extremely supportive of this work, and has been one of our great funders through their Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding. They're very interested in keeping species off of the endangered species list. So they're very supportive of states who prioritize focusing on birds that are rapidly declining, like black tern, that keep coming up. So Fish and Wildlife Service supports much of our black tern work in the state of Michigan, for example. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
What kind of time frame is involved in the plan? Are we looking at 5 years, 10 years? 10 years?
You think we can do
Thank
it,
you.
Paul?
You bet. With you up there leading the job.
I think, one of the things that our partners have commented on is how ambitious this is. And it's important to mention that many partners are already working on this, right? And where we work on the ground, I think is going to be a lot of demonstration projects. And really, when we get to places like Calumet, where we can influence a lot of landowners at the same time, that's where we can all of a sudden get to these big acre goals, because we got a whole group of partners that are taking on our goals with us. And we're seeing that happen. And really that groundwork has been set in Calumet because of great work from many of you and Dunes Cal and Chicago Audubon and others. So that's where we see our members being able to play a great role across the region, is really help mobilize a collective landscape approach in these priority regions.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions for Nat? Okay, if we have no other questions, thank you so much, Nat. Feel free to stick around for the rest of the meeting, but if you have
I will.
to hop off, you can also do that as well.
Thanks.
Thank you, Nat. Our next agenda item is our policy